why do we garden? It's fun. I went over that, you know, growing your own, whether it is flowers or food. It's just so nice to see it. You know, it starts with something small and it just really blossoms. And eating fresh food is so delicious, and it's really easy. You don't need expensive equipment. You don't need expensive supplies. Really simple and affordable. And it's something nice to do. And if you have kids, it's really fun too, to sort of let them learn the whole growing experience from the ground up. Just a few more benefits to gardening or doing any yard work. There are health benefits. So doing yard work, it's, you know, no, it's not like running a marathon, but it's great activity. It's great to be active, especially if, you know, a lot of back and forth and up and down and carrying things around, weeding, you know, anything is more active than, you know, maybe sitting inside or, you know, being very sedentary. So it adds some activity to your day. It can improve your nutrition, because especially if you're growing produce, fruits and veggies, it's great that you can eat that and get the nutrients from that. Whereas these may be things you might be less likely to buy in the store, or just not think of it, or they go bad in your refrigerator, things like that. Gardening also is a huge stress reliever. It can help relax people, lowers cortisol levels, which are the hormone that circulates in our body when we are going through high periods of stress. And these cortisol levels can impact our mood, our appetite, our health. So anything that is lowering them can be very beneficial. And gardening is also a big, just to highlight some of these, it boosts your immune system, it reduces your risk of stroke, it increases your self-esteem, and it stimulates your brain. You really have to think about what you're doing. And so, you know what, I'm going to type something in here. Okay, there. I just wanted to answer somebody's question. So yes, so again, health benefits, just and there's more than this. And again, like I said, it's an activity a family or somebody can do with kids or grandkids. So that's a boost itself. Getting kids off electronics and outside into nature and learning about nature is really great. So if you're new to gardening, some easy plants to grow. Again, today I'm focusing, as a dietitian, I'm focusing on the food aspect, but everything I'm talking about applies to flowers, can apply to flowers as well. So some of the really easy things to grow, I mean, herbs are super, super easy to grow. Basil, chives, parsley, oregano, mint especially. Those are really, really, oregano and mint can really like take over the garden as well. You have to be careful with those ones. Vegetables that are easy. Tomatoes are great, especially the little grape and the cherry tomatoes. Those are fantastic. Peppers, lettuces, green onions, those are all very, very easy things to grow. All right, and in terms of a supply list, what do you need to garden? Like I said, you don't really need a lot. You want to have a small shovel or a trowel, something obviously to dig up the dirt. And I'm going to talk about, well, here, I'll mention it in a minute. So containers, so, you know, when it comes to gardening, you can use your yard if you have yard space. but you can also, have a container garden if you don't have the yard space, or if your yard doesn't have good exposure to the sun, but maybe you have a patio that you can put plants on. So that's one thing that you can consider. And sometimes it's a little bit easier to do the container garden, especially again, if you have maybe, if you're in an apartment and all you have is like a little patio area. So there's lots of different ways you can garden. You don't have to have a huge yard space. But if you are going to do that, you want to make sure you have some good containers. Potting soil. So you don't just want to dig up dirt from the ground because it could have, bacteria or fungus or just other detrimental things in the soil that could influence your plant negatively. So you really want to buy some potting soil. It's not that expensive. Again, they sell it at the nurseries, at Home Depot, Lowe's, all those kinds of places, hardware stores. It's a little lighter than dirt. It often has something called vermiculite mixed into it, which helps make it a little lighter, which is especially helpful as plants are starting out because those roots are so delicate in the small plants, and it's much easier for them to grow and expand in a lighter soil. And the more the roots grow, the more what's above is going to grow. And it's clean. Like I said, it's free of anything that would be detrimental to your plant. And it oftentimes contains nutrients as well. And you also want to have access to a water source, whether that is just a water bucket that you can sort of carry around and fill somewhere else, or access to a hose, having a hose nearby. One of those things needs to be present. Like I said, the ability to bring a watering can or have the hose nearby. And when if you are doing it in your yard, you do want to make sure that the area gets a lot of sun. One thing flowers are different. Many flowers do need sun. There are certainly shade plants, and you can look for those if you have a shady area. But when it comes to herbs and fruits and vegetables, they really do like to have the sun. So you want to make sure you're gardening in an area that has 6 to 8 hours of daylight sun, maybe at least a good several hours of sun over the course of the day. All right, so for planting, a couple of steps in terms of planting. And one is, so if you're planting in the yard directly into the ground, you don't have to worry about how something's going to drain because Mother Nature will take care of that. You plant something in the yard, it gets rained on, the roots get water, but they don't just sit in that water. The water eventually seeps deeper into the ground, dries out, evaporates. And so the roots aren't sitting in that water. But when you plant in pots, many pots have draining holes, which allows excess water to drain out. But if you happen to have a pot that doesn't, and again, many don't, you want to make sure you give the plants some way so that those roots aren't just soaking in water, because that is not good. Plants don't like to have soggy roots, most of them anyways. So what you want to do is take your pot and put these are just some small pebbles. You can, if you have rocks in your yard, you could do rocks. I've actually taken, like small fruit cup containers, or the applesauce containers, poked a couple holes in those, put them upside down in the bottom of my pot, maybe 3 or 4. And it's just something to create space for water to go through, to flow out of, so that it's not sitting in the dirt. If you do use the upside down applesauce cups or yogurt cups or something like that, you don't need to do a coffee filter. But if you're doing rocks that you found from outside, or a couple handfuls of pebbles, what you want to do is lay a coffee filter on top And what that will do is it sort of helps prevent all the dirt that you're putting in the pot from just um, filling up that space along the rocks, and it would sort of defeat the purpose if you do that. So when it comes to digging, so again, if you're using a pot, we're not digging necessarily, but the same thing is going to apply here. So if you're digging, you want to dig a hole that you sort of want to see what the root base is of the plant. Basically, how big is the pot that the seedling is in right now, the little starter plant. I'm talking really about buying plants that that are already have started, just because at this time of the year it's sort of late to start seeds. So I'm starting with the seedlings that we already have. So you want to see how big that little pot is and dig at least as deep, or just about just as deep as that hole, and save that soil that you're digging out. We're going to use that. And then you're going to make sure you have enough space around it to really put that whole root ball right into the hole. The bigger the plant, the bigger the hole has to be. When it comes to a pot, you want to get some soil in there to begin with. So I usually fill the pots, I don't know, maybe half to 2/3 of the way full. Then I sort of almost make that digging, replicate digging. I just make an area in the center for that root ball to go into, so I can fit it in there. And so that's steps 1 and 2. We're getting our area, whether it is a pot or the ground, we're getting that ready for our plant. And then we're just, whether that's digging or filling with dirt or filling with rocks, things like that. And the next step is the planting itself. So when it comes to planting, the way you're going to take the plant out of the pot is you sort of put your fingers around the base of the plant, covering the dirt, sort of right there over the pot, and you flip it upside down, wiggle it out, sort of wiggle the pot at the same time you're wiggling the plant. And those pots from the nurseries are usually plants will usually fall right out of them. This picture in the top here, this plant is very root bound. So those roots had nowhere to go. They just started spinning around the pot. And that really, limits the ability of the plant to grow, because it's limiting the ability for the roots to grow. If that's what you see, what you want to do is cut through those roots a little bit. What I tend to do is just sort of almost 3 slices through the bottom with maybe some gardening shears or a knife, and just, cut 1, 2, and 3 around the base, just cut into them. And that sort of increases their ability now to grow and expand in their new home. So that is step 1 when you plant. Step 2 is we're going to be putting the plant right in that area that we prepared for it. And you really want the top of that root ball to be sort of almost just even with the soil line of, where you've planted where you've dug out. If you put your root ball in there and it's sticking up a couple inches above the ground line, then you want to take it out and dig a couple inches more. You don't ever want that really sticking up too far, because a lot of the roots are going to be exposed. In these pots that you get from the nurseries, they don't have a lot of soil in them, typically a lot of dirt, a lot of protection for the roots, because it's a short-term home. And if it's too high above the soil line, like I said, it's easier for those roots to get dried out and things like that. So you want to make sure that it's planted nice and even with that dirt line, the ground line. Next step is going to be to backfill all the rest of that space around you. So this works the same whether we're in the ground or we're in a pot. You want to make sure that you have lined up the soil in the pot. Well, in the pot, it's a little easier to cover the soil, but you want to make sure that the top of the root ball is not higher than the pot. And you actually want it to be about an inch or two, maybe below the edge of the pot. If it's right up to the top of that pot, and then you fill the edges with dirt, when you water, especially if the dirt starts to get dry at all, instead of seeping into, having a chance to settle there on the dirt and seep in, a lot of the water you put on may just run over the edges because you're creating a ramp, basically. If the center of the plant is higher than the edge of the pot, the water that goes on there is going to sort of run off outside the pot, and you don't want that. So you want to make sure in a pot that the plant has, like I said, an inch or two of space, so that when you do water it, the water has a chance to set there on the soil for a few minutes and as it slowly absorbs in. So then we're going to, like I said, fill. We're going to take our potting soil, if it's a pot. If it's in the ground, we're going to use a combination of the potting soil, and you can also take some of that dirt that you dug up, and we're going to just fill that space all around the pot, or I'm sorry, the root ball. And then you want to pat it in, and you want to pat it firmly, because as you water it, if it's really loose, the soil that you put around the outside and not packed in somewhat tight, as you water it, it's going to, all that loose soil is going to compress, and now this root ball is going to be exposed all around the edges. So you basically want to put the soil in, pat it down. If it's in the ground, I mean, it doesn't even hurt to step on it, just step around the plant as your foot or your hand or whatever you're pressing with sinks. If you're pressing pretty firmly and you're making sinkholes, add in more dirt to fill that up nicely. And then water. You certainly want to water right after you've planted something. The process of sort of moving a plant and getting those roots exposed, even for a short period of time, can be very shocking to the plant. So you want to make sure it has everything it needs to sort of recover. And water is one of those things that will help it. And it also just helps to get those roots exposed to some water right off the bat, so it can sort of absorb that water and make sure that the plant doesn't dry out. How much do you want to water? I mean, some plants, you sort of have to go by the specific plant. Some plants like to be in barely wet soil, so you don't want to water that as regularly. Some plants like to be in somewhat wet, like just consistently, not sopping wet, but consistently damp. And fruits and vegetables, I will say the edibles do tend to like to be watered frequently. If it's out in the sun, certainly daily, if not a couple times a day, if possible. And ideally, when you're watering, you're going to be watering either in the morning or in the evening. And this applies more once we get into like July and August, when that summer sun is really beating down. If you water when it's the peak hottest time of the day, a lot of that water could evaporate before it really gets to the roots. So you want to do it in the morning before the heat comes, or in the evening before you, or after the majority of the sun has sort of gone away for the day, I should say. So just a few sort of tips, just sort of follow-up tips to remember. You always want to make sure that wherever your plant is, it's getting light. That's very, very important. You want to have access to light, sunlight, natural light, several hours a day. You want to make sure that there is space. So even though a plant may look a certain size when you plant it, keep in mind how large it's going to grow. Sometimes it'll say that right on the tag that you get from the nursery, but a lot of times it's very easy to just look this information up and find that information. You want to make sure that there is room both around the plant externally, but also room for the roots to expand under the ground. which something else to consider when planting. You don't necessarily want to plant something near a group of very large trees. Again, wouldn't be good for the shade anyways, or the light. But a lot of times those tree roots, they're so big underground, they can hinder the ability for plants to grow nicely. So you want to make sure that whatever you are growing has space both where the roots are and above. So say you wanted to do, again, if you're in a pot, what that means is you need a large enough pot that's going to support the plant size. If it's in the garden, you need to space things far enough apart to allow for them to grow or allow for the space as they grow. And then watering, I sort of already talked about that. You want to do it regularly. And the idea is to sort of do more slow watering. So you don't want to dump, obviously, a bucket of water on a plant because a lot of that will still end up evaporating or just running off. So you want to make sure it's more of a slow watering that allows that water to really seep down through the dirt into the roots. And that is basically it. Like I said, I have plenty of time for questions. I've got the chat open. I did want to make sure that we had time at the end, sorry, for questions. So please let me know if you have any. I've got the chat open and I can see anything right now. And if you don't have questions, you're welcome to sign off and have a great rest of your afternoon. Thank you so much for joining me. Your chive plant flowers are falling off. Actually, I think that's just a natural sort of the way it naturally grows. You don't need the flowers to use the chives. And in fact, the flowers on the chives can sometimes hinder the growth of the edible chives because the stems that the flowers grow on tend to start to get woody and hard. So ideally, if you can, you want to sort of, before it starts to flower, go in and sort of trim at least. The flowers are very pretty. So what I try and do is I sort of trim down maybe half of my chives so that they don't flower and they're more edible, but then I leave some of the other flowers there or the other chives there to let them flower. But yeah, if they're just falling off as they sort of have flowered and have bloomed and are now dying off, then that shouldn't be a problem. Do you have any tips for growing tomatoes on a very sunny deck? Water, 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 just so that it doesn't dehydrate or get too dry. Water, if you can. What I like to do, and I did this last year, there are these little clay tubes that you can, it's clay, I guess they're clay, that actually have these plastic inserts that you can screw onto a water bottle. So you fill the water bottle, you screw this plastic insert in, and then you sort of flip it fast into this sort of clay tube that you then stick the clay tube in the dirt, and the clay absorbs the water, and eventually, gradually, it sort of helps keep some of that soil from drying out too much because it's got that constant supply of water. As the water seeps out into the dirt, more water gets absorbed into the clay. So that's what I've done for plants that are in a very sunny area. I still water it regularly, but that's one of those things just to help especially the deeper soil from drying out. If there's a heavy rain, when would you know to start watering again? I sort of check the pots. I feel the dirt. If they still feel damp, then I let them be. If they are starting to get dry, that's when I start to water again. Would you mind showing one more time a slide of the easy plants to grow? Sure. Let's see. There we go. How often do you cut back, trim, or deadhead herbs during the growing season? I honestly, like I said, the chives I tend to do before they flower. The more you trim them back, the fuller they will be. So something like, well, and honestly, mint and oregano, I don't do at all, just because they grow so prolifically. And what I've actually done with mint and oregano, so that they don't take over the garden, is I actually plant them in a pot, and then I plant the pot in the ground. And that way, because these plants, especially the roots, sort of run out and pop up, and that helps prevent them from taking over the garden. But I find that those grow pretty prolifically. I don't do much to those. But the basil, I tend to do that more consistently. I mean, honestly, I'll look at it. I mean, I see it almost daily, but I'll go down maybe once a week. And if I see something starting to get a little taller than I want, I'll just pinch it off, because now where I pinch off, it's going to grow out fuller. And you can do that with mint. Actually, it does work. That does work well with mint as well. But that's probably it. Like I just sort of keep an eye on it on a more of a regular basis, and pinch it off. Like I said, maybe every few days, every week, because they're much smaller plants. It's not something, paying closer attention to it is a little bit more crucial if you want them to be fuller plants. If you just want to have the herbs available and don't really care what they look like, then you don't really have to worry about the trimming or the deadheading at all, because they're going to keep growing. They just won't look as nice and full. They'll be a little bit more straggly. So it depends on the purpose. As I just have two bunnies running by me in my yard. Hopefully they're not eating my plants. How do you keep parsley and cilantro up? Yeah, they do tend to wilt. Once, I guess what I do is I sort of just tend to, well, to be honest with you, I don't grow cilantro because I'm one of those people that it tastes like soap. But for the parsley, which is very similar to cilantro, I tend to just sort of, once it starts to get a little big, I will sort of cut it and hang it. Like right now I have some chives and some oregano. I've tied it with a string and I'm just hanging it in sort of a dark corner in my kitchen for it to dry out. And that way, what's in the plant or the ground or the pot is going to continue to grow fresh, but I'm sort of taking care of what might overgrow. I'm drying it out and I put it in like a Tupperware container, and now I have sort of fresh dried herbs, and I really like that. How do you keep the rabbits away from vegetables in the garden? I don't want to hurt them. Yeah, I don't want to hurt them either. And I have not, in fact, on my to-do list today, I'm looking up ways to keep the bunnies from eating my strawberries. Oh my gosh, they are really having a party out here today. I guess they knew what I was talking about. I haven't found a successful way to keep the bunnies out, so I'm sorry, I can't help you. If anybody finds one, please let me know. What type of peppers are the easiest to grow? I have found that hot peppers, or I shouldn't say hot, sweet, you could do sweet peppers too, but as opposed to bell peppers, the bell peppers, the thing with bell peppers is you just don't get as many peppers on a plant. And I tend to like them red, so I need to really let them grow for an extended period of time, like get past the green until they get to the color I want. And I have just found, you know what, I end up with just a couple peppers, and sure, I could buy more pepper plants, but usually I like to have a little of everything. So I have found the peppers, like I said, oh gosh, last year we grew ghost peppers just as a fluke or as a, like a fun thing, almost like fumigated the family out of the house. It smelled so strong trying to cook those. Those grow very well. This year I did pepperoncini, but any of those more like the Italian, whether it's the sweet or the hot, like banana peppers, things like that, I find those are just much easier to grow. They're much more prolific. You'll get more. What I did a couple years ago with the I don't want to say hot peppers, they weren't extremely hot, but just not super sweet peppers. I picked several of them and I pickled them, which was really fun. I just made 2 little ball canning jars, not a huge batch of pickled peppers. And so that was sort of fun. So my husband could put them on his sandwich. Any other questions? When is the best time to start? Now. I always tend to start to buy my, if I'm buying plants, our tradition is always Mother's Day that we go and get our plants, but sometimes things aren't quite ready to buy. The nursery doesn't have them yet. So I usually Memorial Day weekend, depending on where you're living. But I found Memorial Day weekend is usually a good time. Once you're pretty certain that there's not going to be any more frost, that's a good time to do it. Easy flowers to grow. So I have actually just bought daisies for the first time, and they seem to be doing very well. I bought Shasta daisies, which I had never done before, but they look fantastic. I have some columbine in the front yard, that are doing well. Oh, somebody says roses. Oh, I would love to grow roses. I always thought those were hard, so I've never even tried them. But apparently in full sun plant roses. I'm trying to think of what I have over at the side of my house. I've heard that planting marigolds can keep various critters away. So I have not, but I've not yet tried that. A lot of different animals don't like the marigolds. Apparently they don't like the smell. So that's something to try. At least it looks prettier than putting. It's funny, when I was looking it up yesterday, almost all the 100% solutions were, oh, put chicken wire over it. And I'm like, don't really want to do that. What is good to do at the end of the season to prepare for next year? So when we're talking about things like vegetables, those are annuals. So most of those, the ones we'd be planting now, you're just going to sort of say goodbye to them at the end of this year and get new ones next year. Herbs, I tend to bring those into the house and put them by a sunny window. And those do well. And then because I do those in pots, or I have some in the garden and some in pots. And so I just bring them out into the patio in the summer. What I did last year for the first time, I have a bed of strawberries. And last year, for the first time, I put some of them in a hanging pot to see if the rabbits would stay away from them. And then I brought it into the garage over the winter, and it seems to have survived. So it was just in a dark, shady place, not too dark. It was sort of by the window, but sort of a cool, shady place with a little bit of sun. And the strawberries seem to have survived, but I can't tell you anything more than that because I've just done it the first time. She's got a brown thumb and the roses have flourished, he or she. All right. Well, so now I want to get some roses. Did not think they would be that easy. Actually, somebody gave me some mini roses for Mother's Day in a little pot, and those did not survive so well. I don't know if they needed to be transplanted sooner. I'm not sure, but they're still in the patio. I'm hoping to bring them back to life. All right. Well, if that's it, I will say everybody have a fantastic rest of your day. I hope everybody learned something. And I'm going to get on to my cure for keeping the strawberries in my yard, or keeping the bunnies in my yard, but not in my strawberries. Have a great afternoon.